right. Hello, everyone. We're going to start. Welcome to session 7, the first session on Thursday morning. And so thank you all for being here. So we'll have a full day's worth of various sessions as well as workshops that start on Friday. So we still have a lot more of the conference moving forward. So this is a session on video and vision, and given yesterday's keynote, video streaming is still highly relevant. We have 4 exciting papers that cover different aspects of video, from the network to the infrastructure, to learning, to communication systems and video streaming protocols. So it's really wonderful to have this nice diverse package of papers put together. Our very first paper is DeltaStream 2D-Inferred Delta Encoding for live volumetric video streaming. The author that's presenting is Hojeong Kim, who's a master's student at UC Boulder. He, of course, works on volumetric streaming. He also mentioned this is his first MobiSys and conference presentation, so good luck to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. All right, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see a lovely room of people here, fully packed, of course. Now, today I'll be presenting DeltaStream. It's a novel solution for live volumetric video streaming. And this work is a collaboration between Gray University, University of Colorado Boulder, and POSTECH. Now, please note that today I'll be presenting in place of our first author, Hojeong Kim, at Korea University. Now, let's start with the evolution of video. First, there's a 2D video that we all know and love, YouTube, Netflix. Simple. However, here, we don't get any degree of freedom. No matter how much we move our heads, the content doesn't change. And then there's the 360-degree video. We get 3 degrees of freedom here. This one, we can actually tilt our heads left and right. We could even move it up and down and even lean it left and right. And what we see actually changes. And lastly, we have the volumetric video that we'll be focusing on today. This one is your typical 3D VR experience, where you have 6 degrees of freedom. On top of the 3 degrees of freedom, you can actually move around in the XYZ axis. Then the volumetric video here can be represented in different formats, such as point cloud, voxel, or mesh, as you can see on the figures out there. And then there's the use cases of streaming volumetric video, such as telepresence, immersive education, VR, and even remote surgery. Well then, what is point cloud then? I'm sure many of you, it's your first time hearing about point cloud. It's nothing complex. It's simply a set of points that form a 3D object. It's as like pixels in 2D space. Now, one point takes about 15 bytes in memory. And examples of a point cloud you can see on the right of the students over there, or even the soldier down below. And then when we move on to point cloud video, it's nothing really more than a sequence of point cloud frames, right? Let's assume 30 frames per second, and let's assume the point cloud has about 200K points. That will need about 720 megabits per second bandwidth. And let's take another point cloud. The soldier down below, that one has 860K points. That was going to require 3 gigabits per second bandwidth, which is pretty hard to find, especially not in my local area. And then, let's move on to how we create volumetric video. First, there's a camera capture methods. We use an RGBD camera to capture the subject, get the RGB and the depth frame, take the camera parameters, combine it all to create a 3D point cloud. Simple. Then there's the multi-view stereo method, where we take multiple cameras, take their positions, and create a 3D object. And lastly, there are other methods such as NERF, 3D Gaussian splatting, etc. But in our work, we use the RGBD camera capture method because that is the one that supported real-time capture and creation of 3D objects. Now, we know how a volumetric video is created. Let's look into how we can stream it over a network in live. Simple. We capture it, encode it, transmit it over the network, decode, render. Easy and familiar, right? Sender, network, receiver. We all know this. But there is one caveat. Live video usually means 30 frames per second, and end-to-end latency must be at least less than 100 milliseconds. But I'm not sure if you guys recall, but raw data could go up to 3 gigabits per second in bandwidth. So doing that raw is not easy. And therefore, we identify bottlenecks in these 3 stages: encode, transmit, and decode, as highlighted in the red box over there. And therefore, we identify the key challenge, where it is to effectively reduce data size under real-time constraints. Now, we recognize the challenge, and to solve this challenge, we took inspirations from the 2D video codecs. We noticed that there has been over 30 years of research in that area, and they managed to reduce the bit rate reduction by 87%. So and the key reason behind that is leveraging temporal and spatial correlations. And one example you can see on the right is an example of using motion vectors. You see the box on the left frame and the box moving under the frame to the right. That's simply moving that block of the frame to the right instead of transmitting the entire frame, hence motion vectors. So naturally, we looked to see if there were solutions in the 3D space that used this. And voila, turns out there already is. I'm not sure if any of you heard of MPEG behind the MP4. Yeah, pretty famous, right? They have this thing called VPCC. Now, what it does is that it takes a 3D point cloud and projects it into 2D patches. You can see it in the diagram over there. And by doing so, it is able to leverage existing 2D video codecs and therefore use temporal correlations. And this makes it extremely efficient at compression. However, there's always a but, right? It has great compression, but it's extremely slow. You see on the graph on the left shows VPCC performing extremely well when it comes to reducing data size. But on the right, we see the frame rates, which is even less than 2 frames per second, hence not suitable for real-time streaming. There are other encoders, such as Draco by Google and PCL. These are mainly used by the current works in the live volumetric video streaming area. But these methods do not take advantage of the temporal correlations. Now, we asked, why is it that they don't actually use temporal correlations as much? Because it's so efficient, right? Well, it turns out in 2D, frames have a fixed width and height. If it's a full HD video, 10920 by 1080p, right? But so in that case, it's actually very easy to calculate temporal redundancies between frames by using a matrix abstraction operation. But in 3D, the story is slightly different. You see, it's not exactly a structured data. Between frames, and even consecutive frames, they might not have the same number of points, and the data doesn't fall into a specific region. And therefore, it's hard to figure out how a point in the previous frame has moved in the next frame, and therefore hard to calculate temporal redundancies. But it is also worth mentioning that there are existing solutions in this area. So for example, data transformation through graph representation, ICP, and even deep learning-based methods. We live in 2025. But to be able to for these methods to be able to be used in live streaming, they need 30 frames per second, which means encoding and decoding must happen under 33 milliseconds, right? But you can see on the table over there that that isn't exactly the case, and they are quite slow and hence unfit for live streaming. And this is where we,
Lost our slide. Oh, it's
there
back.
you go.
Good.
We're back. Yeah, grand reveal. This is where we reach. Okay. Is it my system or? Oh, yeah, it looks to be. Yeah. Okay. I'll try not to touch it. Yep, so this is where we see DeltaStream, our proposed system. This one is a novel system that leverages temporal and temporal correlations based on 2D information. And it has two goals. One, achieve low encoding and decoding latency. I promise I didn't touch anything. It seems to be, yeah, okay. And have efficient compression. And here's an overview of our system. We use multiple RGBD cameras that provides RGB and depth frames to our live media server. Now here, we need to focus on the block-based delta encoder title we have in the diagram. Now, suppose that we have two frames, frame t-1 and t. And these are consecutive frames. And in the first frame, I stand still, or the person in the frame stands still. And then in the next frame, I raise my hand, right? The only difference between the two frames is going to be my right arm, right? So, in that case, what DeltaStream does is that it figures out that only right part of my arm has changed, and therefore, it does not need to send the entire point cloud for the entire frame, but instead, it only uses the delta between the two frames. Now, it doesn't end there. We go on to the block-based part. Here, we take the differences and figure out which of those differences, when divided into small blocks, are suitable for using 3D motion compensation to save bandwidth. And that's why we use the word block-based. And as you can see in the diagram, I'm just pointing with my laser here, there's the match blocks, and then there's the mismatch blocks. And this classification allows us to not transmit entire point clouds, but rather also transmit 3D motion vectors to save bandwidth. And when the data arrives in the client, we apply the 3D motion compensation, and the next frame is rendered on the client. Now let's go slightly deeper into the encoders and the decoders. First, we have the frame t-1 and frame t. These are consecutive RGB frames. And we take the difference between the two frames and filter out blocks that have a significant difference between the two frames, which is represented using red blocks. Please keep this in mind. We call this high difference blocks. And then we have, again, frame t-1, but this time, this isn't the next frame, but rather motion vectors applied to the frame t-1. And then we take the difference again, and we set a certain threshold, and we have match blocks. Now these green blocks mean that these blocks are suitable for using 3D motion compensation, and therefore we do not need to send point clouds over the network. Now putting this all together, we have the high difference blocks. And then there's the match blocks that are suitable for 3D motion compensation. And then the mismatch blocks. These are the blocks that have significant differences between the frames, but are not suitable for 3D motion compensation. And therefore, we need to transmit the raw point cloud over the network. And this shows which payload we use for each type. Now, a keen observer might actually think, how did we even get to 3D motion vectors? Did you just pull it out of a magic hat or something? Well, this is how we figure it out. We take the 2D motion vectors and the 2D depth difference to put that together with the camera parameters, and voila, we get the 3D motion vectors, which is essentially just the delta XYZ and the 3D point coordinates. Now you can see in this figure that I presented just here, when using 2D motion vectors, you get the source block and the destination block, and you want to move it from the source to the destination. And then you take the coordinates delta UV, which is shown in the diagram here, and apply this into the equation that's shown on the screen, and you get delta XYZ, which is essentially 3D motion vector. And that's how we get it. Now let's move on to the decoder. The decoder has the 3D point cloud of the previous frame, frame t-1. And by using the equation on the previous slide in reverse, we're able to match which 3D points in the point cloud is a matched block or a mismatched block. So matched blocks, we apply 3D motion compensation. Mismatched blocks, we remove the points relevant in the previous frame, and then we add the new points that are in the payload for the delta point cloud. And we put all this together to create the next frame, frame T. Now here we move on to our implementation. Our hardware consists of 4 RGBD cameras, or Intel RealSense, and then we have a streaming server and a client as laptop. For software, we use C++, and we have open sourced it on GitHub. If you go to SARS, thank you. And for performance evaluation baselines, we use LiveScan 3D and MetaStream. LiveScan 3D just sends raw point cloud frames, and MetaStream uses object segmentation to save on payload. They all use Draco encoding, including our system, DeltaStream, but DeltaStream is the only one that uses temporal correlations. Now, for our performance evaluation, we use 2 scenes, static and dynamic. To measure FPS and end-to-end latency, now, we can see when there's no bandwidth limit, FPS is good all across the board, regardless of which system we use. However, the moment we limit the bandwidth to 100 megabits per second, we can observe that DeltaStream is the only one that maintains 30 frames per second when MetaStream and LiveScan 3D suffer. And as for the end-to-end latency, we can also see DeltaStream is the fastest. Thank you. Now let's quickly break down the end-to-end latency. You see on the left, figures A and B, there are hatched regions, and that means Draco encoding and decoding time. And we can observe that MetaStream actually spends less time on Draco encoding and more time on other operations. And this operation is mainly on applying 3D motion vectors. Now, although we have that extra operation, we can observe that overall efficiency is greater than other systems, and hence, end-to-end latency is lower. And we also observe that our bandwidth usage is reduced up to 97.5% when compared to all data transmission. But here, we have a demo, as in on the left, we have the state-of-the-art MetaStream, and on the right, we have DeltaStream. And they are all at 30 frames per second, and they both have SSIM values of 0.9, meaning they both have good image quality. But the important thing is, MetaStream uses 30 megabits per second, but our DeltaStream uses 8.6 megabits per second, thereby reducing the bandwidth usage by 72%. To sum it all up, DeltaStream is the first live volumetric video streaming system that leverages 2D information and also leverages spatial and temporal encoding. It achieves efficient compression, and that is 72% bandwidth reduction compared to the state-of-the-art, and it also achieves low encoding and decoding latency. And that is all. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Questions? You might have to turn it on, yeah.
Test? Okay. Hi, Hojeong. Nice presentation. I don't know if you recall, in the census, at the end of last year, there is a paper also use this kind of encoding, decoding to enhance the transmission efficiency. They use some kind of like extract some high-level semantics. What's your difference as compared to those works?
So could you repeat the question again?
Oh,
So
okay, sorry. So I'm asking about your project's uniqueness, especially there was a recent papers about extracting those kind of high-level semantics for volumetric video streaming. That was last year's census paper, I think. Yeah. So
I'm afraid I'm not familiar in that area, but please feel welcome to contact the first author on the
okay.
paper, Hojeong, and he might have better answers for you on that front.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, great presentation. Just had a quick question. Just trying to understand, you mentioned you have a target of 30 FPS in your applications.
Sorry,
You have a target of 30 FPS in your applications, and I'm just trying to understand if that's usually sufficient for the applications that you're targeting.
So yes, 30 frames per second might not be enough for specific applications, but at the moment we're focusing on 30 frames per second for everyday usage, such as telemetric video. But you're correct that although I'm not an expert in the area, applications such as remote surgery might need a few more frames per second. But yeah, for now, we've focused on 30 frames per second.
All right, let's thank the speaker. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Our